I never thought of myself as the main character in anyone's story, not even my own. For years, I was the quiet presence in the back corner of the office, the person who solved problems that others did not even understand, the one who could pull meaning out of chaos. My name is Alina Ward, and for 6 years I worked as a senior data analyst at Brightcore Analytics in New York. That title sounds important, maybe even glamorous, but the truth was less flattering. I was the invisible engine that kept things running while others enjoyed the spotlight. The office itself was designed to look like the future. Walls of glass, furniture in clean Scandinavian lines, neon slogans about disruption and innovation painted near the elevators. There was always cold brew coffee in the fridge and a rotation of artisanal snacks in the break room. It was the kind of office that tried too hard to prove it was modern, while hiding the fact that under the surface everything was as political and messy as any corporate environment. My desk was on the far side of the 16th floor, tucked near the server room. No windows, no city view, just the hum of cooling fans and the smell of toner drifting from the supply closet. Some people might have hated it. I preferred it that way. It meant fewer interruptions, fewer fake smiles at my door, more time to focus on the numbers. Numbers were my refuge. I could spend hours lost in spreadsheets, building models, cleaning corrupted data sets that others had broken. To me, a messy database was like a puzzle begging to be solved. Over the years, I had patched together systems at 3 a.m, rewritten predictive models in days when they should have taken months, and saved clients from disasters that would have cost millions. But none of that translated into recognition. The feedback in my performance reviews was always the same. Exceptional technical skills, reliable under pressure, needs to improve leadership presence. That last phrase was corporate code. It meant I did not look or sound like an executive. I did not play golf with partners or charm clients over cocktails. I did not smile enough in boardrooms. I was competent, but invisible. That was the role I had accepted, until the morning everything changed. We were called into the main conference room, the kind with a polished oak table long enough to seat 20 people and screens that could display data in floor-to-ceiling detail. Richard Hale, our CEO, stood at the front. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested he had never doubted himself a single day. Richard's voice was calm but strong as he said, "Brightcore has just secured a $40 million contract with Everline Retail Group. This will be the most significant project of the year." Applause burst around me. People leaned toward each other, whispering excitedly. 40 million was more than a contract. It was a statement. It was the kind of engagement that led to awards, magazine features, and rapid promotions. I felt my chest tighten with something I had not allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. For once, maybe this would be my chance. Richard let the anticipation hang for a moment, then smiled. To lead this engagement, I am proud to introduce someone new to our team, Damien Cole. The double doors opened and he walked in. Damien was the kind of man who could command a room before he even spoke. Early 30s, dark hair styled with precision, tall frame wrapped in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His smile was confident, practiced, the smile of someone who had always been told he was destined for success. The room erupted into applause again. Phones slipped out of pockets to check his LinkedIn profile. Whispers floated around me. Harvard MBA, startup turnaround specialist, keynote speaker, a star. I clapped with everyone else, but my hands felt heavy. Then Richard delivered the line that sealed my place. "Alina will provide technical and data support." Support. That word again. Not lead, not partner, not architect. Support. It meant I would design the models, scrub the data, and build the foundations. Damien would stand on stage, polish the slides, and take the applause. I forced my face to remain neutral as people congratulated each other, but inside I felt the old bitterness rise. Another year of invisibility. Another year of watching someone else shine while I carried the weight behind the curtain. After the meeting ended, I walked back to my desk. My small, windowless corner felt even smaller now. I powered on my monitors, telling myself to focus on the work. That was all I could control. Then I heard a voice. "You must be Alina." I turned. Damien was standing at my door, his smile wide, his posture relaxed. He did not knock, people like him never did. He simply occupied the space as if it already belonged to him. I said, "Yes, I have heard you are the genius here. I am excited to collaborate." His words sounded warm, but they felt rehearsed, the kind of compliments executives learn from leadership books. He leaned casually against the doorframe, his cologne subtle but unmistakable. I replied, "I will make sure the data is ready for you. That is perfect. This project will be incredible." He gave me a final smile and left as quickly as he had appeared. I stared at my screen, fingers resting on the keyboard, my thoughts circling. I already knew how this story usually ended. Someone like Damien would take the frameworks I built, dress them in buzzwords, and call them his own. And I would be thanked in small font at the end of a slide deck, if at all. But this time, something inside me whispered that the story might not play out the same way. The day rolled on like any other, but I felt the shift in the air. People whispered Damien's name in the hallways, some curious, some already impressed. It had only been a few hours, and already he was a presence, a storm pulling attention toward himself. I returned to my spreadsheets, but I caught fragments of conversation drifting from the break room. Harvard, turned around 3 companies, dynamic leader, visionary. No one said those things about me. I was simply reliable. Reliable meant invisible. At lunch, I sat at my desk as usual. I liked the quiet, the chance to eat in peace while catching up on unfinished scripts. My salad was untouched as I scanned through Everline's preliminary datasets. They were messy, full of duplicates and corrupted entries. My fingers itched with the familiar drive to untangle them. Numbers did not lie. People did. I was halfway through cleaning a customer retention file when I noticed Damien outside my office again. He walked past with a small entourage, 3 analysts trailing him like satellites orbiting a sun. His laugh was loud, his gestures confident, as if he had already taken ownership of the floor. For a moment, he glanced into my office. Our eyes met briefly. He raised a hand in a casual wave before moving on. That wave told me everything. He saw me as useful but secondary. Later that afternoon, Richard sent out a company-wide email. Subject line, "Welcome our new strategic leader." Inside was a glossy headshot of Damien, his resume listed in bullet points, the kind of resume designed to impress investors. Underneath, a line that made my stomach twist. "Damien will elevate our client engagement to the next level." My inbox pinged again seconds later. This time, it was a direct message from Richard. "Elena, please provide Damien with any historical Everline data. He will need your full support." Support, always that word. I gathered the files, compressing years of client history into a secure folder. As I worked, I thought of all the crises I had solved that never made it into emails. The late nights, the weekends lost, the systems resurrected at the last possible moment. None of it mattered now. What mattered was how well Damien could smile while presenting my work. By the end of the day, exhaustion pressed heavy on me, not from the tasks, but from the weight of being unseen. I shut down my monitors and sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the servers. On the subway ride home, I watched the city blur through the windows. New York never stopped moving. People pressed close, faces lit by phones, conversations in half a dozen languages. I wondered if any of them had ever felt invisible the way I did. That night in my apartment, I tried to push the day out of my mind. I cooked pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and sat by the window overlooking the street. Below, a man played saxophone on the corner, his notes weaving through the noise of traffic. I envied him. People noticed him. People stopped, listened, dropped bills into his case. I opened my laptop again. Work called to me like it always did. I reviewed Everline's retail data, tracing patterns in customer behavior, flagging inconsistencies. Within minutes, I was lost in the numbers, the noise of the world falling away. But even as I worked, Damien's face lingered in my mind. That smile, that casual charm, the ease with which he had stepped into a role I had dreamed of for years. I closed the laptop and whispered to myself, "Not this time." The next morning, the office buzzed louder than usual. Damien was everywhere. He stopped by desks, complimented people on projects he barely understood, and charmed everyone he met. By the time the morning stand-up began, he was standing next to Richard like they had known each other for years. When the meeting ended, Damien walked straight to my office. Again, no knock. He leaned in the doorway. "Elena, can you prepare a quick segmentation analysis of Everline's Pacific Northwest stores? I want to use it in a draft deck." It was phrased like a question, but it was. I nodded, my voice steady. "I will have it ready by the afternoon." "Perfect. You're a lifesaver." He left before I could reply. I stared at the empty doorway, my mind running. He would keep coming back, each request faster, larger, more urgent, and each time my work would be swallowed into his polished story. Still, I did the analysis, because that was my role, because I had learned long ago that refusing only drew criticism. But as I watched the models form on my screen, I felt a quiet anger building. I saved the file carefully, labeling it with my usual conventions. My initials sat quietly in the metadata, invisible to anyone who did not care to look. But I cared, I always cared. That night I stayed later than usual. The office emptied around me until only the cleaning crew remained. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights. Something inside me shifted. It was not anger. Anger was too sharp, too fast. This was colder, more deliberate, calculation. I knew then that this story would not end the way the others had. On Friday, Richard announced that the official kickoff with Everline would take place the following week. Everyone was excited. Everyone except me. I knew my role. I would sit quietly, adjust the numbers, fix the slides, and watch Damien perform. But as I walked back to my windowless office, past the server room, past the humming machines that had become my only companions, I realized something. Invisible did not mean powerless. I pulled open a fresh notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. Document everything carefully. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. Whatever storm was coming, I would be ready. The first week with Damien at Brightcore was like watching a storm roll in from the horizon. It began with a whisper, then grew louder each day until it consumed everything in its path. From the moment he stepped into the building, the atmosphere shifted. People who had never cared about corporate announcements suddenly studied his resume as if it were scripture. Conversations in the elevator revolved around his past accomplishments, the supposed miracles he had performed at other companies. I listened silently, knowing how easily stories became legend in offices like ours. Few people ever asked for proof. Damien carried himself with the ease of someone who had never been questioned. He moved through the halls like he owned them, stopping by desks to offer compliments that sounded warm but meant little. Nice work on that presentation. Impressive figures in your report. He delivered these lines with a smile that made people believe he had actually read their work. Most did not realize that he was only scanning the surface, collecting goodwill the way others collected business cards. I noticed how quickly he attached himself to Richard, our CEO. Every time I passed the executive wing, Damien was there, walking beside him, laughing at some anecdote, offering opinions on topics he barely knew. He had a way of filling silence with confidence, and confidence was often mistaken for competence. By Wednesday, he had already assembled a small team around him, not through formal assignment, but through sheer charisma. Analysts who had once come to me with questions now flocked to his office, eager to be included in what they believed was the future. I watched them from my corner, reminding myself not to take it personally. On Thursday afternoon, I received my first direct request from him. He appeared at my door without warning, holding a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. "Elena, I need a quick breakdown of Everline's customer segments in the Pacific Northwest. By the end of the day, if possible." He smiled as if it were a casual favor. My fingers paused on the keyboard. End of the day meant only a few hours. Still, I nodded. "I will have it ready." "Great. You are amazing." He turned and left, the smell of roasted beans lingering in the air. I stared after him, knowing this was only the beginning. I completed the analysis as requested. Clean, detailed, accurate. I sent it to him before leaving for the night. The next morning, I sat in on a Zoom call with Everline executives. Damien presented my segmentation as if he had crafted it himself. He spoke about insights and strategies, weaving stories around the numbers. His voice was smooth, his gestures practiced. Not once did he mention my name. I sat silent, taking notes for the record, my face neutral even as frustration burned beneath the surface. This was not new, I had seen it before, but something about the way Damien carried himself made it feel heavier, more deliberate. The following week, the requests multiplied. First, it was a revenue model, then customer churn analysis, then a full projection for the upcoming quarters. Each time, the message arrived with little context. "Elena, handle this." "Elena, send me the figures." "Elena, pull the data." "No, please." "No, thank you," just assumption. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once the foundation was set, he would involve me more directly. But as the days stretched on, it became clear. I was being used as a silent machine, nothing more. By the end of the second week, he was forwarding client emails directly to me, adding only 2 words at the top. "Handle this." I handled them. Of course I did. Because that was my job, and because I had been conditioned to solve problems no matter how thankless the task. But each time I pressed send, a small part of me hardened. One Thursday afternoon at exactly 4:37, Damien stormed into my office. He did not knock. He never knocked. "I need your login credentials for Everline's internal folders," he said, his tone brisk, impatient. I froze. Those folders contain my working files, drafts not yet ready for review. "They are not prepared for client viewing," I replied carefully. He waved a hand dismissively. "I know what I am doing. I just need to pull some visualizations for tomorrow's meeting. Send me the credentials." Then he was gone. I sat there in silence, the glow of my monitors reflecting against the walls. For 6 years, I had watched my work disappear into other people's portfolios. For 6 years, I had been told I lacked leadership presence while others stood on stage with my solutions. Something inside me shifted again, colder this time, sharper. That night, I opened a new folder on my drive. I titled it Everline Reports You, my initials small but deliberate. Inside it, I began placing files that looked perfect on the surface but carried flaws beneath. Not lies, not obvious mistakes. Subtle miscalculations, inverted formulas, outdated models dressed in fresh colors. If Damien wanted to take my work without understanding it, I would let him. And when the time came, the truth would speak louder than his smile. The next morning, Damien strutted into the team's stand-up with a deck already prepared. My corrupted files were on the screen, wrapped neatly in corporate branding. He clicked through the slides with ease, pointing at charts he barely understood. "I spent all night crunching these numbers," he said confidently. "The patterns are fascinating." I kept my face still, though inside I wanted to laugh. He had spent the night copying and pasting. Sarah, one of the junior analysts, raised her hand. "That churn rate seems strange. Are we really losing that many premium members?" Damien's smile did not falter. "That is exactly the kind of outdated assumption we need to challenge. Sometimes the data reveals uncomfortable truths." He moved to the next slide. A revenue projection that soared upward on the back of a flawed formula. My flawed formula. "This," he announced, "is why Everline hired us. Growth opportunities like this." Heads around the room nodded, though some eyes flickered with doubt. I wrote in my notebook silently, documenting every claim, every misrepresentation. I was no longer just the support. I was the witness. As the weeks rolled forward, Damien became louder, brighter, more central. He hosted lunch and learns where he repeated buzzwords from the latest business articles. He sent company-wide emails about our groundbreaking methodology, attaching charts I had built. He was invited to speak at a webinar about innovation in retail analytics. On the slides, I saw my models, my formatting, my logic. His name alone at the bottom. He also began to cut me out of meetings. At first, he said it was because I was too valuable to waste time on client check-ins. Later, he stopped explaining at all. My inbox filled with requests, but my calendar emptied. Each evening, after the office grew quiet, I stayed behind. While others celebrated Damien's charisma, I crafted my counterweight. I built parallel versions of every analysis. One clean, accurate, documented. The other, the corrupted version Damien eagerly downloaded. I embedded digital signatures in the metadata, my initials discreetly placed. I logged every access, every download, every renaming he attempted to disguise. I became meticulous, almost obsessive. Screenshots of Slack threads, timestamps from file servers, even video clips of Zoom meetings where he presented my work. Piece by piece, I built a mosaic of evidence. It was strange, almost exhilarating. For once, invisibility worked in my favor. He did not notice me watching, recording, preparing. But invisibility also hurt. I would sit in meetings, silent, as Damien received praise for solutions he could not explain. Marcus, one of the partners, once said in front of everyone, "Damien's innovative thinking is exactly what this project needed." My stomach tightened, but I only nodded. Let him own it, I told myself. Let him build his castle on sand. The tension reached a new level during a Tuesday afternoon check-in with Richard. Damien was presenting progress to him, again using my corrupted files. "The modeling work is exceptional," Richard said, looking at me. "Elena, your technical skills really shine." Actually, Damien interrupted smoothly. While Elena provided some initial data pulls, I reimagined the analytical approach. "This is fundamentally different from what we usually do." I forced a smile. "Yes, Damien has definitely put his own spin on it." Richard nodded approvingly. "Keep it up." Inside, I felt a cold satisfaction. Every claim he made, every word he stole, pulled him closer to the edge of the trap. By the third week, Damien had created a shared folder titled DC Everline Deliverables. Inside were my corrupted files, stripped of my initials, rebranded with his. He thought he had erased me, but the system's version history told a different story. Each file traced back to my folders, my creation dates, weeks before he even joined Brightcore. I remember one night vividly. It was late, the city glowing beyond the dark windows. I sat at my desk reviewing the real Everline data. The numbers told a clear story. Modest growth, strong customer loyalty, a few challenges but nothing impossible. A healthy business waiting for careful guidance. Then I opened Damien's deck. 40% growth, radical shifts in demographics, inventory strategies that would bankrupt a company in a single quarter. Fiction dressed as analysis. I leaned back and whispered to myself, he has no idea what he is doing. But I knew exactly what I was doing. The following Friday, Damien sent out a company-wide email. He was thrilled to announce our upcoming preliminary review with Everline. His words radiated confidence. This showcases Brightcore's next-level strategic capabilities. He copied the leadership team, the board, even a few investors. Reading that email, I felt my pulse steady. He was committing himself fully, publicly, without realizing he had been carrying poisoned files all along. And I was no longer just invisible. I was the one writing the script. The weeks that followed blurred into one long repetition of the same pattern. Damien would appear at my door, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with impatience sharp in his voice, and he would ask for something. A model, a projection, a set of visualizations that looked good enough to impress but were empty of substance. I gave him what he asked for, and each time I watched him walk away with my work, I felt myself fading further into the shadows. At first, I told myself this was temporary. That Richard and the partners would eventually see the truth, but hope was a fragile thing, and each passing day chipped away at it. One Monday morning, I joined a Zoom call with Everline's operations team. Damien was presenting an updated forecast for their regional stores. I recognized every chart. They were mine, lifted straight from my files, though he had changed the color scheme to Brightcore's branded palette. He spoke with the easy rhythm of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror. He told stories about consumer behavior, about hidden growth opportunities, about bold strategies that could transform Everline's market share. The executives nodded along, impressed. I sat silent in the corner of the call, my video off, my microphone muted. Near the end, Everline's CFO, Margaret, asked a pointed question. The projected margin improvements seem unusually high compared to historical data. Can you walk me through the assumptions behind them? Damien paused only for a heartbeat. Of course, he said smoothly. He launched into a vague explanation about optimization, digital transformation, new consumer trends, words that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Margaret's face tightened on the screen. I will want to review the detailed assumptions separately. Damien nodded, smiling, as if he had won a point instead of barely deflecting. The meeting ended with polite applause. Later that day, I received a private message from Damien. Elena, please prepare a breakdown of the assumptions Margaret asked about. Keep it simple. I'll handle the rest. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. Finally, I wrote, I will send you the data by tomorrow. But I didn't send the version he expected. By now, my system was elaborate. For every request, I created 2 versions. The corrupted one he took and presented, and the clean one I saved, time-stamped, documented, ready to be revealed when the moment came. Still, the silence around my name grew louder. At the next all-hands meeting, Richard praised Damien's leadership. He said, Damien's innovative vision is transforming our relationship with Everline. His ability to think strategically has elevated Brightcore to new heights. Applause filled the room. I clapped along, my face blank. Not once did Richard mention the long nights I had spent, the hundreds of files I had cleaned, the models that had taken me weeks to perfect. Afterward, I stood by the coffee machine, stirring sugar into a paper cup. Sophia, a younger analyst, passed by. She smiled politely, but her eyes held something like guilt. She said, You're doing incredible work, Elena. We all know it. Her voice was quiet, meant only for me. I wanted to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I smiled and said, back to the grind. Sophia walked away. Damien appeared seconds later, patting my shoulder like we were old friends. You're a rock star, he said. I couldn't do this without you. Then he walked off toward Richard's office, leaving me holding my coffee like an afterthought. That night, I stayed late again. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I pulled up Damien's deck for the upcoming Everline review. I compared it line by line against my real analysis. The differences were glaring. Inflated numbers, missing caveats, projections that bordered on reckless. He was building a tower out of air and everyone was applauding him for it. I whispered to myself, let him. Because the higher the tower, the harder the fall. By the third month, my exclusion was complete. Damien held client calls without me. He hosted strategy sessions without inviting me. He sent weekly updates to Richard that were filled with my work but carried only his name. The strange thing was how quickly people accepted it. It was easier to believe the story of the charismatic leader than to look deeper. Easier to applaud the man on stage than the woman in the wings, but I watched everything. I saved every file, every message, every piece of metadata that connected my name to the work. I became meticulous, almost obsessive. My folders grew thick with evidence. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wondered what I was doing. Revenge was not my nature. I had spent years keeping my head down, avoiding conflict, but something about Damien lit a fire I had never felt before. He wasn't just stealing credit. He was gambling with Everline's future and with Brightcore's reputation. And somehow, with my name still hidden in the background, he was gambling with me too. One afternoon, I walked past the executive conference room and saw Damien through the glass wall. He was laughing with Richard and Marcus, another partner. They were leaning in, engaged, captivated. He tapped his phone, showed them something, and they burst out laughing again. I stood in the hallway, watching unseen. For a moment, anger flared so hot I thought I might walk in and confront him. But then I forced myself to breathe. Not yet, I thought. The story wasn't ready. The cracks began to show during our second major review with Everline. Damien presented with his usual flair, the same polished slides and confident tone. But this time, the executives looked less impressed. Margaret, the CFO, frowned as she compared his numbers with the company's internal reports. Jonathan, the CEO of Everline, leaned back in his chair, silent, his fingers tapping against the table. I sat quietly in the back, taking notes, my face expressionless. I watched as Damien stumbled through answers, relying on vague buzzwords and broad statements. He dodged direct questions, redirecting the conversation with charm. For a while, it worked. But the seed of doubt had been planted. After the meeting, Richard congratulated Damien on a job well done. He clapped him on the back, praised his vision, told him the client was lucky to have his leadership. Damien grinned, soaking in the praise. No one looked at me. No one asked how the models were built or who had provided the analysis. When I returned to my desk, I opened my notebook. I wrote down every inconsistency Damien had presented, every number that didn't match the truth, every question the executives had raised. I underlined them twice. Not yet, I reminded myself. Each day, the requests grew bolder. Damien began demanding complete decks, not just data. He asked me to create visualizations, polished and client-ready, so he could present them as his own. He forwarded entire client conversations to me, adding only, "Fix this." One night, as I finished yet another report, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. My face looked tired, pale, my eyes ringed with shadows. I whispered, "Who am I doing this for? Him, them, myself?" But then I thought of the files saved carefully in my hidden folder, the evidence piling up like a silent army waiting for command. And I knew the answer. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for the truth. Damien's influence spread beyond the Everline project. He began attending executive committee meetings, offering opinions on areas he barely understood. People listened anyway. His voice carried weight simply because it was loud, confident, decisive. I overheard Marcus one afternoon, talking to another partner in the hallway. "Damien has the presence we've been missing," he said. "He makes clients feel like they're in capable hands." I wanted to laugh. Presence. That was the word my performance reviews had used against me for years. It didn't matter how many fires I put out, how many millions I saved. Without presence, I was nothing. With presence, Damien was everything. I walked past them, silent, their conversation cutting off as I entered the break room. They smiled politely, but their eyes said it all. I was a technician. He was a leader. Still, not everyone was convinced. Sophia, the junior analyst, stopped by my office one evening. She hesitated at the door, then said softly, "Alina, are you okay?" I looked up from my screen. "Why?" "Because I see how much you're doing, and how much he's taking credit for." Her honesty caught me off guard. For a moment I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced a small smile. "That's the way it works here." She frowned. "It isn't fair." "Fairness has nothing to do with it," I replied. She left reluctantly and I returned to my work, but her words lingered. It wasn't fair. It had never been fair. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay that way. By the end of the quarter, Everline's executives were openly questioning some of Damien's assumptions. Margaret requested detailed breakdowns of the models, the kind of technical depth Damien couldn't provide. He came to me in a panic one evening, long after most people had left. His tie was loose, his hair slightly disheveled. "Alina, I need the detailed documentation for the churn model. They want to see the logic behind it." I looked at him, silent for a moment, letting the weight of his request hang in the air. Then I said, "I'll prepare something." He exhaled in relief. "You're the best." But the file I prepared was not what he expected. It was the corrupted version, polished just enough to look legitimate, but riddled with holes an experienced executive would spot. I saved the clean version in my private folder, time-stamped and documented. When Damien presented the corrupted file, Margaret's frown deepened. She circled numbers with her pen, tapped her notes with impatience. "This doesn't align with our internal metrics," she said. "Can you explain this discrepancy?" Damien smiled, confident as always, of course. He launched into a rehearsed speech about evolving market dynamics, but his words were thin, flimsy. Margaret's expression did not change. I watched silently, my face calm, my heart steady. The cracks were widening. That night, I walked out of the building into the cool New York air. The city lights sparkled against the dark sky, taxis honking in the distance, the scent of roasted nuts drifting from a street cart. I paused on the sidewalk, breathing it in. For years, I had been invisible. For years, I had let others take the credit, let others stand on stage while I stayed in the shadows. But now, for the first time, I felt the story shifting. Damien thought he was winning. Richard thought he had found his star. But I knew the truth, and the truth was patient. I whispered to myself as I walked toward the subway. Not yet. But soon. The night I realized just how reckless Damien had become was the night I stopped doubting myself. I was alone in the office again, the building hushed except for the hum of the HVAC and the occasional rumble of the elevators. My screens glowed in the dim light, Everline's data sprawled across them like an endless map. I was tracing inventory figures when I noticed something strange. The numbers in Damien's latest deck didn't just exaggerate growth, they contradicted the base data entirely. In his slides, he claimed Everline's online sales were climbing at 20% year over year, but the raw files showed growth barely over 3%. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Damien had taken a small upward trend and inflated it beyond recognition. He had erased entire sections of customer churn. He had replaced messy, realistic figures with clean, exciting ones. And he had done it all under the Brightcore logo, under Richard's watch, and technically under my name because my systems had generated the files. I whispered into the empty office, "He's not just taking credit. He's rewriting reality." The thought chilled me. If Everline trusted those numbers, if they made decisions based on his fabrications, the consequences could be catastrophic. Millions lost, jobs destroyed, reputations ruined. And somewhere in the fine print, my fingerprints were still there. I opened my notebook and wrote a single word at the top of the page: protect. From that night forward, my focus shifted. I still built the corrupted files Damien demanded, but I also built something else. I created a system of mirrors. For every flawed model he presented, I saved the clean version with metadata proving its creation date. I exported logs from the servers, showing when Damien accessed, copied, or renamed my files. I kept screenshots of Slack messages, email chains, meeting notes. At first, it felt paranoid. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized how far Damien had gone. In one email to Richard, he had attached my deck, removing only my initials from the footer. He wrote, "I spent the weekend reworking the projections. I think you'll find them compelling." In another, he bragged to Everline about his unique methodology, describing a clustering model I had developed months before he arrived. I saved them all. The walls of my apartment became a battlefield map, sticky notes with dates and file names, printouts of emails with red circles around lies, arrows connecting one piece of evidence to another. It looked obsessive, maybe even unstable. But to me, it was order. I told myself, this isn't revenge, this is survival. Meanwhile, the pressure inside Brightcore grew. Everline's executives were asking harder questions. Margaret, sharp-eyed and relentless, wanted detailed validations of Damien's assumptions. Jonathan, quieter but perceptive, watched every presentation with the patience of someone who had seen countless consultants come and go. Richard, however, remained dazzled. To him, Damien was the star he had always wanted. The man who could command a room, impress a client, charm a board. Richard praised him constantly, calling him the future of Brightcore. I became invisible again except when Damien needed something. Then he appeared at my door, his smile thinner now, his words brisk. "Alina, fix this. Alina, add more charts. Alina, make it look cleaner." I obeyed outwardly, but inside, each request strengthened my resolve. One evening, Richard called me into his office. His tone was friendly, but his eyes were sharp. "Elena, some of Everline's people are raising concerns. I need you to make sure Damien has everything he needs. We can't afford mistakes." I wanted to say he is the mistake, but I swallowed the words. Instead, I nodded, understood. Richard leaned forward. "Don't get lost in technicalities. What matters is the story. Clients buy vision, not spreadsheets." I left his office with a bitter taste in my mouth. Story over truth, vision over reality. That was the gospel of Brightcore, but I believed in something else. Numbers don't lie, people do. It was during the preparation for the next major Everline review that I decided to set the final stage. Damien demanded a series of revenue projections, bold and optimistic. I created them, flawless on the surface, but I knew they would collapse under scrutiny. Hidden in the formulas were inconsistencies only someone deeply familiar with the data would spot. I saved the clean version, as always, in my private folder. Time-stamped. Documented. When I handed the corrupted deck to Damien, he barely glanced at it before attaching it to an email and sending it off to Everline. I watched the notification pop up on my screen. Sent. No hesitation. I whispered, "You just dug your own grave." That night, I stayed late again, walking through the empty halls of Brightcore. The city glowed outside the glass walls, neon and headlights stretching to infinity. I thought about the years I had spent hiding in plain sight, fixing problems, cleaning messes, waiting for someone to notice. No one had, so I would make them notice. The following week, the office was buzzing with preparation for Everline's mid-project review. This was the moment where clients decided whether to stay fully committed or to pull back. For Brightcore, losing Everline was unthinkable. Damien walked through the office like a king preparing for his coronation. He called impromptu huddles, gave motivational speeches, and threw around phrases like strategic pivot and paradigm shift. People listened, even when his words meant nothing. I kept my head down, polishing the corrupted files he demanded, but inside I was calm. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of direction. Every exaggerated chart he sent, every baseless projection he claimed as his own, pushed him closer to the inevitable collision. One evening, as I finalized a churn model, Sophia stopped by again. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then whispered, "Why do you let him do this? Everyone knows it's your work." I looked at her, the only person who had dared to say it out loud. "Because I need him to think he is winning," I said softly. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing more. She left quietly, and I returned to my screen. The day of the review came. Damien strutted into the conference room with his deck, polished and confident. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression full of expectation. Everline's executives joined via video, faces stern and focused. Damien launched into his presentation. His slides sparkled with color and optimism. He spoke of untapped revenue streams, of customer behaviors shifting dramatically, of opportunities too good to ignore. At first, the executives listened politely. But as he moved deeper into the numbers, their expressions hardened. Margaret frowned openly. Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clasped, his eyes sharp. "Excuse me," Margaret interrupted. "Can you explain how you calculated the retention improvement? Our internal data suggests a much lower rate." Damien smiled, smooth as ever, of course. He rattled off a string of vague explanations. Market shifts, innovative strategies, digital acceleration. Margaret cut him off. "That isn't an explanation. I want to see the assumptions, line by line." Silence fell. Damien faltered for the first time. He promised to send the details later, then hurried on to the next slide. I sat in the back, watching, taking notes. My heart was steady. This was the beginning. After the meeting, Richard called me into his office. He looked tired, though his voice remained firm. "Elena, I need you to support Damien more closely. The client is pushing hard, and he needs airtight numbers." I considered my words carefully. "Richard, the numbers have to reflect reality. If we give them projections that don't hold, it could damage the partnership." Richard sighed. "You worry too much about the technical side. What matters is the story. Clients don't buy numbers, they buy confidence." I wanted to shout that confidence built on lies was nothing but a trap. Instead, I nodded. Understood. As I left his office, I heard him mutter, "Damien just needs a little more polish." "He's still the best chance we've got." I walked down the hall, my fists clenched. Richard would not save me. Brightcore would not save me. If I wanted the truth to win, I would have to save myself. That night, I stood in front of the wall in my apartment, covered in sticky notes and printouts. To anyone else, it might have looked like madness. To me, it was clarity. I traced the lines of evidence with my finger, every file, every timestamp, every message, a trail leading straight to Damien. For years, I had believed my invisibility was a curse. That being overlooked meant I was powerless. But I realized now it was an advantage. He never saw me coming. He never thought I mattered. That blindness was his weakness, and it was my weapon. I whispered to the empty room, "You made me invisible. Now I will make you transparent." As the week ended, Damien prepared for another meeting with Everline. He was nervous now, though he tried to hide it. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his voice sharpened when he barked orders at the team. "Elena, double-check the projections, make them stronger. We need to wow them," I smiled faintly. "I'll handle it." And I did. I built the deck he wanted, bright and glossy, numbers inflated just enough to attract attention but destined to collapse under pressure. I saved the real version, complete and irrefutable, in my private folder. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to open the curtain. The strange thing about lies is how quickly they grow legs. At first, they're small, exaggerations, half-truths, numbers polished just enough to look pretty. But then, like vines, they twist and stretch, wrapping around everything until you can no longer see where truth ends and invention begins. That was exactly what I watched Damien do. At the start, he only inflated trends. A 3% increase became 10. A slight dip in churn became stabilization. It was easy to overlook, easy for executives to clap along and nod approvingly. But by the time we hit the third month with Everline, Damien was rewriting reality wholesale. Entire customer categories appeared in his slides that didn't exist in the data. He talked about emerging millennial shoppers in regions where Everline didn't even operate. He described online behaviors that had no basis in the datasets. When I compared his decks to my raw files, it felt like staring at two parallel universes, one messy, flawed, but real, the other glossy, impressive, and utterly fictional. The worst part? People wanted to believe his version. Inside Brightcore, Damien's legend grew by the day. Richard treated him like the golden boy, parading him into executive meetings, copying him on board updates, calling him the face of Brightcore's new era. Marcus and the other partners ate it up, nodding gravely as if every cliché he spouted was a pearl of wisdom. Meanwhile, my role shrank further into the background. I'd walk past the glass-walled conference room and see Damien commanding the room with his wide smile and easy gestures. He leaned forward at just the right moments, cracked jokes at the perfect beat, told sweeping stories about transformation and vision. People laughed, people admired, people believed, and I was invisible again, reduced to the quiet hum behind the curtain. But invisibility has its benefits. No one noticed me watching. No one noticed me taking notes, saving files, building my quiet arsenal. The first visible crack came during a Thursday review with Everline. Damien was midway through his dazzling presentation, describing an optimistic growth curve that soared higher than anything in their history. On the video screen, Margaret, Everline's CFO, narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through Damien's rhythm. "Can you explain the underlying assumptions for that forecast?" Damien's smile flickered only for a moment. "Of course," he said, and launched into a wave of buzzwords. He spoke of digital acceleration, market shifts, and untapped customer segments. His tone was confident, but the words were air. Margaret didn't look convinced. Jonathan, Everline's CEO, leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. His silence was heavy, watchful. I sat in the back of the room, my notebook open, recording every word. When the meeting ended, Damien brushed it off with a laugh. "Executives always push," he told Richard. "It's part of the game." Richard nodded, clapped him on the back, praised him again, but I saw it differently. This wasn't a game. This was a fuse burning slowly toward something explosive. That evening, Damien stormed into my office. His polished mask was gone, replaced with irritation. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly damp with sweat. "Elena," he snapped, "I need a validation report by tomorrow. Margaret is nitpicking everything." I looked up calmly. "Validation of what exactly?" "The projections, the churn model, everything, just make it airtight." I tilted my head, my voice quiet but firm. "Damien, the models aren't airtight. They never were." His jaw tightened. "You're missing the point. Clients don't buy numbers. They buy confidence." He said it as if it were an irrefutable truth. I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "I'll prepare the report." What I didn't say was that the version I'd give him would be riddled with subtle flaws. Not obvious enough to expose me, just enough to deepen Everline's suspicion. When he left, slamming the door harder than necessary, I whispered to myself, "Keep digging, Damien." The next day, Damien presented the validation report I had prepared. On the screen, the numbers looked neat, the graphs impressive. But Margaret wasn't fooled. She leaned forward, circling figures with her pen. "This doesn't align with our internal retention data, and here, these projections are inconsistent with our actual operating costs." Damien chuckled, dismissive. "That's because you're looking at it through the old lens. We're reimagining your business model." Jonathan finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than Margaret's questions. "Damien, we're not here for imagination. We're here for accuracy." Silence followed. Damien smiled thinly, pivoted to another slide, and tried to regain his rhythm. I wrote in my notebook, "He's slipping." After the call, Richard summoned me to his office. His expression was hard, his voice clipped. "Elena, Everline is frustrated. Damien needs your full support. I don't want any more issues." I forced myself to stay calm. "The issue isn't support, Richard. The issue is accuracy." He waved a hand dismissively. "You're too focused on technicalities. Clients don't want decimals. They want vision. Damien gives them that." I wanted to scream that vision without truth was fraud. Instead, I said quietly, "Understood." As I left his office, I realized Richard wasn't blind. He saw the cracks, but he chose not to acknowledge them. Damien was telling the story he wanted to believe, and Richard was willing to stake everything on that story. It was dangerous. It was infuriating, but it was also my opportunity. 2 weeks later, Damien went further than ever. He sent a deck to Everline without even looping me in. I only discovered it when Margaret forwarded me a copy with a note. "Can you clarify these sources?" When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Entire datasets were fabricated. He had cited reports that didn't exist, invented benchmarks from industry leaders, and presented forecasts that violated basic financial logic. It wasn't exaggeration anymore. It was outright fraud. I printed the deck and laid it on my desk. My hands shook, but not with fear, with resolve. This was the moment I had been waiting for. That night, I began consolidating everything. I pulled raw datasets and aligned them with Damien's fabricated versions. I highlighted every contradiction, every lie. I exported system logs that showed when Damien accessed my files and how he renamed them as his own. I took screenshots of Slack messages where he demanded I prepare decks in hours. I recorded voice memos of myself narrating the discrepancies. Piece by piece, I built a weapon. In the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by papers and sticky notes, I realized something startling. For years, I had believed invisibility was my curse. But now, invisibility was my shield. Damien never suspected me. He never thought I mattered. That blindness was his fatal flaw. I whispered to the empty room, "You made me invisible, but I'll make you transparent." At Brightcore, the tension thickened with every passing day. Everline pressed harder. Richard grew more desperate. Damien doubled down on his lies, polishing them until they gleamed like diamonds. But diamonds cut, and these lies would cut him down. As I walked through the office one late evening, the floors empty and the city glowing outside, I felt no fear anymore, only clarity. The end was coming. And when it did, no one would be able to look away from me again. The announcement came on a Monday morning, like a thunderclap that shook the entire office. Richard gathered us all in the main conference room, his voice filled with forced enthusiasm. "We've reached the defining moment of our partnership with Everline," he said, his hand resting heavily on Damien's shoulder. "This Friday, we will deliver a comprehensive strategy review. It will be our chance to prove that Brightcore is not just a service provider, but a true partner for the future." The room buzzed with excitement. Heads turned toward Damien, whose smile gleamed like polished steel. He stood there, soaking in the spotlight, nodding with practiced humility. Richard's voice rose. "Damien will be leading the presentation. This is our showcase moment." Applause erupted. People clapped, some even cheered. Damien raised a hand modestly, though his eyes gleamed with triumph. No one looked at me. I sat in the back, my notebook open, my pen poised. My pulse was steady. This was it, the stage I had been waiting for. The bigger the spotlight, the sharper the shadows. The days that followed blurred into a relentless storm of preparation. Damien barked orders at the team like a general preparing for war. He demanded new projections, fresh visualizations, bold forecasts that glistened with promise. "Elena, I need revenue models that show at least a 30% growth potential over the next 5 years," he said one morning, striding into my office without knocking. I looked at him evenly. "The data doesn't support that." He leaned over my desk, his cologne sharp in the air. "Make it support that." I held his gaze for a long moment, then I nodded. You'll have it by tonight. Of course, what I gave him was a glittering facade. The numbers climbed upward, bright and clean, but beneath the surface they were riddled with fault lines. To the untrained eye, they looked flawless. To someone like Margaret, they would be a minefield. Damien didn't notice. He never did. He was too focused on the story, on the performance. By Wednesday, the office felt like a theater in rehearsals. Desks were cluttered with draft slides, whiteboards filled with half-baked strategies, analysts rushing back and forth with nervous energy. Damien strutted through it all like a director, clapping his hands, giving feedback that sounded profound but meant nothing. Make the charts bolder. Use stronger colors. Clients need to feel excitement. People nodded, scrambling to adjust fonts and palettes, mistaking style for substance. I sat at my desk, quiet, my headphones blocking out the chaos. While they polished illusions, I curated reality. In my private folder, I assembled the clean datasets, the true projections, the raw evidence. Line by line, file by file, I built my counterweight. No one noticed. That evening, Sophia stopped by again. She lingered at my door, her face pale with worry. "Elena," she whispered, "this isn't right. Damien's numbers don't make sense. People are starting to notice." I looked up from my screen. Who's noticing? Some of the junior analysts. Even Marcus looked uneasy during rehearsal today. I leaned back, studying her. Sophia's voice shook, but her eyes were steady. She wasn't naive anymore. She had seen too much. I said softly, "Then let them notice. Sometimes the best way to reveal a lie is to let it collapse under its own weight." She hesitated, then nodded. "You have a plan, don't you?" I smiled faintly. I always have a plan. Late Wednesday night, as I was finishing the final corrupted deck for Damien, Richard appeared at my office door. His expression was serious, his suit jacket draped over one arm. "Elena," he said, "I just want to be sure you're giving Damien your best work, right?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Of course." He studied me, as if trying to read the truth in my face. Then he sighed. "I know you and Damien have different styles. You focus on details, he focuses on vision. But for this presentation, we need vision. We need to dazzle them." I nodded slowly. "You'll get what you need." As he left, I whispered under my breath, "You'll get exactly what you deserve." Thursday morning, Damien held a full-dress rehearsal in the executive conference room. The entire leadership team gathered, notebooks open, eyes fixed on him. He strutted through the slides with the confidence of a showman. Charts soared upward, forecasts sparkled with promise, stories flowed smoothly from his lips. Richard clapped enthusiastically at the end. "This is it. This is the vision Everline needs." Marcus, however, frowned slightly. "Some of these numbers feel ambitious. Are we sure they're defensible?" Damien waved a hand. "Ambitious is what sells. Clients don't want to be told they'll crawl forward. They want to believe they'll fly." The room chuckled. The tension dissolved. Richard nodded approvingly. I sat quietly in the corner, watching, recording every word. My heart was steady, almost cold. Let him fly. The higher he soared, the harder the fall would be. That afternoon, I returned to my office and shut the door. The applause from the rehearsal still echoed in my head, hollow and irritating. Damien's voice rang louder than anyone else's, but beneath the performance I could hear the cracks. Marcus had felt them too. And Margaret, sharp as a knife, would not let them slide tomorrow. I opened my hidden folder. Inside were weeks of careful preparation. Raw Everline datasets, clean, validated models, timestamps proving when I had created them. Server logs showing how Damien had accessed and renamed my files. Side-by-side comparisons of his fabricated projections with the truth. I scrolled slowly through the evidence, my heartbeat steady. I imagined Margaret's face when she saw the discrepancies. I imagined Jonathan's silence breaking, his calm voice asking the one question Damien would never be able to answer. Where did this data come from? For the first time in years, I felt almost calm. Not hopeful, not relieved, calm. The calm of someone who has already loaded the weapon and is simply waiting to pull the trigger. By Thursday evening, Damien's mask began to slip. He paced the hallways, his voice sharper, his commands more abrupt. Demanded last-minute changes to slides, shifting colors and fonts as if that would disguise the weakness beneath. "Elena," he barked, appearing at my door, "I need a backup model in case they push too hard on the growth numbers. Make it aggressive, but not too aggressive. Something that looks like we've pressure-tested the assumptions." I looked up from my screen. "That's not how pressure testing works." He waved a dismissive hand. "You know what I mean, just make it convincing." I studied him for a moment. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly out of place. For the first time, I saw not confidence but desperation. The thought almost made me pity him. Almost. "You'll have it. I said quietly. When he left, I whispered, "And it will bury you." That night, I didn't go straight home. I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed and the cleaning crew shuffled past with their carts. The city glowed outside, neon bleeding into the glass walls, traffic humming far below. I sat in the silence, surrounded by screens, preparing two versions of the truth. The first was Damien's deck, bright and glossy, inflated with lies. I polished it carefully, ensuring it looked exactly the way he wanted. Numbers soaring, charts gleaming, promises flowing. It was beautiful in the way a mirage is beautiful, captivating, but deadly if you chased it. The second was mine. The real version. The raw data, the honest models, the careful documentation. I wrote a clear narrative to accompany it, detailing every point where Damien's version diverged from reality. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I let the truth speak for itself. By the time the clock struck midnight, both versions were ready. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of the monitors. My reflection looked pale, tired, but steady. I whispered, "Tomorrow." As I left the building, I saw Richard still in his office, the glow of his desk lamp spilling onto the carpet. He waved me in. "Elena," he said, his voice unusually soft, "I know I've pushed you hard, I know Damien can be demanding, but tomorrow is everything. If Everline commits, Brightcore will be set for years. I need you to give him your full support." I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was lined with stress, his eyes tired. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He wasn't malicious. He was just desperate. Desperate to believe in a savior, even if that savior was built on lies. "You'll get what you need," I said quietly. He smiled faintly, relief flickering across his face. "Good, I'm counting on you." As I walked away, I thought, "You're counting on the wrong person." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. The city outside my window never rested, its noise a constant reminder of the world's chaos. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the past months. The stolen credit, the lies, the invisibility. Tomorrow, all of it would converge. I imagined Damien standing at the front of the room, his voice strong, his slides gleaming. I imagined Margaret interrupting him, her questions sharp and unrelenting. I imagined Richard's face as the cracks widened, as the truth spilled out. And then I imagined myself, no longer invisible, no longer silent, stepping forward with the evidence. My pulse slowed. My breathing evened. Tomorrow, the story would change. The morning of the presentation felt different, heavier somehow. Even the air in the office seemed charged, as though the building itself understood what was coming. I arrived earlier than usual. The hallways were silent, the kind of silence that exists only before a storm. I carried my laptop in one hand, my private folder safely encrypted and backed up on 3 separate drives. When I stepped into the conference room, the staff were already buzzing with nervous energy. Screens flickered as technicians tested the video link to Everline's headquarters. Water bottles and notepads were neatly arranged at each seat, as if tidiness could prepare anyone for what was about to unfold. Damien was at the center, of course. He wore his sharpest suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair styled with precision. He laughed too loudly, slapped backs too firmly, radiated confidence like a man rehearsing his own myth. He turned when he saw me, his smile broad. "Elena." "Perfect timing. You've got the final deck ready?" "Yes," I said, handing him the version he expected. "Everything is in place." He didn't notice the weight behind my words. He never did. By 9 o'clock, everyone was seated. Richard sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff but his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Marcus was beside him, expression thoughtful, notebook open. Several junior analysts clustered at the back, eager to witness history. On the screen, Everline's executives appeared one by one: Margaret, sharp-eyed and composed, Jonathan, quiet and steady, and a handful of directors whose faces betrayed cautious skepticism. Richard cleared his throat. "Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is the culmination of months of hard work. Damien will walk you through our strategy for Everline's future." Damien stepped forward, his voice smooth, his smile dazzling. He clicked to the first slide, and the room filled with bright colors, bold projections, and sweeping promises. He talked of transformation, of innovation, of untapped markets waiting to be conquered. His words flowed like a polished script, practiced and confident. At first, the Everline team listened politely. Margaret took notes. Jonathan leaned back, his fingers steepled. The other directors nodded occasionally, though their eyes remained cool. I sat near the back, notebook open, pen poised. Every word Damien spoke, every slide he clicked, felt like another step toward the inevitable cliff. By the 20th slide, Margaret raised her hand. Damien, these revenue projections assume a 35% increase in customer retention within 2 years. That's nearly double our historical best. Can you walk us through the underlying assumptions? Damien smiled, unflustered. Absolutely. We've modeled aggressive digital adoption strategies and integrated predictive analytics to capture churn before it happens. The numbers reflect the opportunity we see in this evolving landscape. Margaret's frown deepened. That's not an explanation. What specific models did you use, and what baseline data are you comparing against? A flicker of irritation crossed Damien's face. Well, the models are proprietary to Brightcore, but the important thing is that they align with industry best practices. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Industry best practices don't generate numbers. Data does. We'd like to see the actual assumptions. The room fell silent. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Perhaps we can provide those in a follow-up. Margaret cut him off. No, we've been patient. If this partnership is to continue, we need transparency now. Damien's smile strained. Of course. Elena will prepare the documentation afterward. My pen stopped mid-stroke. He had just pointed the gun at me. I looked up, meeting Margaret's gaze across the screen. She was sharp enough to catch the pause, the hesitation. Jonathan's eyes flicked to me as well, quiet but piercing. This was the moment. I closed my notebook, stood slowly, and said, if it helps, I can provide the assumptions right now. The room froze. All eyes turned to me. Richard looked startled, his mouth opening to object, but Margaret leaned forward. Please do. Damien's smile faltered for the first time. Lena, that's unnecessary. I walked to the screen at the front of the room, plugging in my laptop with steady hands. My private folder glowed like a secret I had been guarding for months. This, I said, opening the clean dataset, is the actual retention data from Everline's past 5 years. As you can see, the highest improvement achieved was 18% under very specific conditions. I clicked to the next slide. These are the models I built, validated against your internal numbers. The projections here are realistic, modest growth, sustainable strategies, nothing miraculous but solid. I clicked again. Side by side, Damien's inflated version appeared. And this, I said quietly, is what Damien presented. Gasps filled the room. The discrepancies were undeniable. Lines that soared against lines that barely rose. Fabrications laid bare beside reality. Margaret's face hardened. Damien, how do you explain this? Damien stammered, his smooth rhythm broken. Well, I simplified the numbers for clarity. Jonathan's voice cut in, low and firm. This isn't simplification. This is deception. Richard paled, glancing between us. There must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said, my voice steady. Every file Damien has presented originated from my systems. I've documented the timestamps, the metadata, the edits. I can show exactly when and how the numbers were altered. I projected the logs, line by line, each entry a nail in Damien's coffin. The room was silent except for my voice, calm and precise. When I finished, Margaret sat back, her expression grim but satisfied. Thank you, Elena, that was enlightening. Jonathan nodded slowly. Very enlightening. Damien's face was a mask of desperation now, his charm stripped away. This is sabotage. Elena is undermining me because she's jealous. She's always been bitter, always hiding in the shadows. I looked at him evenly. I don't need to sabotage you, Damien. You sabotaged yourself the moment you chose lies over truth. The words hung in the air like a blade. Richard buried his face in his hands. The partners sat in stunned silence. The junior analysts at the back looked at me with wide eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. And for once, they were. Damien's voice cracked as he tried to recover. You don't understand. This is how consulting works. You paint the picture first, then you figure out how to get there. Elena she's sabotaging me, trying to make me look bad in front of the client. Margaret didn't flinch. We don't pay consultants to lie to us. We pay for clarity. If you can't provide that, then this partnership has no future. Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze steady. Brightcore's credibility is on the line here. Either you stand behind the truth or you stand behind fiction. There is no middle ground. The room felt smaller, tighter. Richard looked pale, his usual confidence drained. He glanced at Damien, then at me, then back again. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Elena, he said carefully, you're certain about this evidence? I met his gaze without hesitation. Every number, every timestamp, every log can be verified. I've documented everything. If you like, we can send it to an independent auditor right now. Silence followed. A heavy, suffocating silence. Damien slammed his hand on the table. You're making a mistake. Without me, Brightcore has no future with Everline. I built this relationship. I sold the vision. You think a spreadsheet is what wins clients? No, it's me. I'm the reason we're here." His voice grew louder, almost frantic. "She's just bitter because she doesn't have presence. She hides behind her data while I do the real work. Without me, she's nothing." I felt a strange calm wash over me. His words no longer stung. They sounded hollow, desperate. For once, the room saw him without the mask. Margaret closed her notebook with a sharp snap. "We don't work with companies that fabricate data. Brightcore needs to decide who it really is." Jonathan nodded. "We'll be in touch once you've sorted yourselves out." And with that, the video call ended. The silence after the screens went dark was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Damien, is this true?" Damien sputtered. "Of course not, she's twisting everything. Enough," Richard snapped, louder than I had ever heard him. He turned to me. "Alina, send me the files, all of them." "I already have," I said quietly. "They're in your inbox." Richard's eyes flicked down to his phone. He scrolled, his face paling as he read. His hand trembled slightly before he set the device down. The partners looked at one another, unspoken words passing between them. Marcus broke the silence. "We can't let this stand. If Everline shares this story, our reputation is finished." Richard rubbed his temples. We'll handle it. Damien, leave the room." Damien froze. "What?" "Leave," Richard repeated, his voice like stone. For the first time, Damien looked small. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darted around the room for an ally, but none remained. Slowly, stiffly, he stood and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Richard looked at me. "You should have told me sooner." I met his gaze evenly. "You wouldn't have listened." The truth of it hung in the air. Richard flinched just slightly, then nodded. Marcus cleared his throat. "Alina, you've just saved this firm. Without your documentation, we'd have been destroyed." I felt the weight of every unseen hour, every late night, every invisible contribution. For years, I had waited for recognition. Now, in this silence, I realized recognition was not something given, it was something taken. I straightened my shoulders. I'll prepare the corrected strategy for Everline. The real one, it won't be flashy, but it will be honest. That's what they need. For the first time, every eye in the room was on me. Not Damien, not Richard, me, and they saw me. When I returned to my office, I sat in the quiet for a long time. My hands trembled faintly, but my heart was steady. The war was not over. Richard still had to mend the relationship. The partners still had to decide how to handle Damien. But the battle that mattered to me was finished. For years, I had been invisible. A ghost in the system, a shadow in the corner, a name buried in footnotes. Not anymore. The truth had spoken, and I was the one who carried it into the light. The day after the presentation, the office felt like a different world. The usual morning chatter was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. People moved quietly through the halls, avoiding eye contact, as though the entire building had been shaken by an earthquake and they were afraid to touch the rubble. I walked in slowly, my bag heavy at my side, my mind replaying the scene over and over. The way Damien's smile cracked, the way Margaret's voice sliced through the lies, the way Richard's shoulders seemed to collapse under the weight of truth. For years, I had fantasized about a moment like that, about the masks falling away. But I hadn't expected the silence that followed, the hollow stillness of a company staring at itself and not liking what it saw. Damien's office was dark. His desk, usually cluttered with coffee cups and half-scribbled notes, had been cleared overnight. His nameplate was gone, his chair pushed neatly under the desk. He had vanished as quickly as he arrived, like a storm that had burned itself out. Whispers floated through the corridors. Suspended. HR involved. Might be legal action. Nobody spoke his name above a whisper, as if invoking it might summon him back. For the first time in months, I felt the air lighten. His shadow no longer stretched across the floor. That afternoon, Richard called a meeting with the leadership team. His voice was hoarse, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "We failed," he said bluntly. "We allowed style to blind us to substance. We celebrated performance while ignoring truth, and we nearly lost everything." No one argued. Marcus leaned forward. "Everline hasn't terminated the contract yet. Margaret called this morning. She said they appreciated Alina's honesty." Dozens of eyes turned toward me. The sudden weight of attention pressed against my chest, but I didn't look away. Richard nodded slowly. "Alina, you saved this firm yesterday. Without you, our reputation would have been destroyed." I sat still, my hands folded on the table. For years, I had longed to hear those words. Now that they came, they felt strange, almost foreign. "Thank you," I said quietly. Later that day, Richard asked me into his office privately. His tone was softer than I had ever heard. "Elena," he said, "I want you to take over as lead on the Everline account. You've proven not only your technical skill but your integrity. That's what Brightcore needs now." I studied him carefully. This was the same man who had dismissed me for years, who had praised Damien for his vision while ignoring my warnings. Now he sat across from me, humbled, offering me the role I had been denied again and again. "I'll accept," I said finally, "but on one condition." His brows furrowed. "What's that?" "That we never let this happen again. That data comes first, that truth comes first. No more smoke and mirrors." He nodded slowly, almost painfully. "Agreed." The next week, I met with Everline's executives directly for the first time. Margaret's gaze was sharp, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes now. Jonathan listened quietly, hands folded, as I walked them through the real strategy. No exaggerations, no empty promises, just clean numbers, sustainable approaches, realistic growth. When I finished, the silence stretched for a moment. Then Jonathan nodded. "This is what we wanted all along." "Thank you," Margaret added. "We can work with this." Relief washed over me, not like a sudden wave but like a tide receding after a long storm. Back at the office, things began to change. Slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. People who had once ignored me now stopped by my office for advice. Junior analysts asked me to review their models. Partners invited me into meetings I had never been welcome in before. Even Sophia, shy and hesitant at first, walked into my office one morning with a proud smile. "I knew you'd do it," she said. I smiled back, something warm sparking in my chest. We did it. For the first time, I felt visible. Not because I had demanded attention, not because I had played the game of charisma and presence, but because I had let the truth speak louder than lies. Still, Damien's presence lingered like a ghost. Some nights I would walk past his empty office and feel a strange mix of emotions: anger, pity, vindication. He had built everything on illusions, and when the lights came on, there was nothing left. I didn't know where he had gone or what would happen to him next. Part of me didn't care. But part of me wondered if he had learned anything, or if he was already searching for another stage, another audience to dazzle. Months later, after Everline officially renewed their contract with Brightcore, I sat by my office window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the journey, the years of invisibility, the quiet hours no one noticed, the endless battles fought in silence. I thought about the trap I had set, the moment it had sprung, the look on Damien's face when the truth finally caught him. For so long, I had believed invisibility meant weakness. But now I understood, invisibility had been my weapon. While Damien burned bright and fast, I had moved quietly, carefully, patiently. And when the time came, I had been ready. I closed my notebook, the one that had carried all my hidden notes, all my evidence, all my plans. On the cover, I wrote a single word in bold letters: visible, because that's what I was now, and I would never disappear again.